The remains of her skeleton were found in the undergrowth.
She probably died from a blow to the head.
This is not related to the period of time when the girl was last seen.
Imagine that you are doing ordinary things, watching a movie or reading a book. Suddenly, a vivid memory from your childhood flashes into your head, and that memory is of murder. This is exactly what happened to Eileen Franklin. At that moment, when she was spending time with her children, she looked closely at her daughter, and suddenly her brain unlocked a repressed, terrible memory of her childhood friend Susan. Eileen struggled with it and couldn't believe it could happen, tried to chalk it up to her wild imagination, but the memory was too realistic. She told her husband Barry about a sudden memory she couldn't shake. After that, he called the police, saying that his wife had witnessed the murder, but was afraid to testify.
What happened?
Hi. My wife just told me something. When she was 8 years old, she witnessed a murder. The killer is someone she now knows well.
Killer or victim?
Both the killer and the victim. It happened 20 years ago. The case was never closed.
The police have promised to do everything they can to protect them, but Eileen must tell what happened, because without her testimony, they can't arrest anyone. After several phone calls with detectives, Eileen agreed to a face-to-face meeting and testified.
In 1969, the body of freckled Susan Nason, who disappeared on September 22nd in Foster City, was found under an old mattress near an abandoned gravel pit. Her skeletal remains were found by the San Francisco Water Department patrol at the bottom of a 10-foot slope, 8 miles from the home.
Donald Nason, Susan's father, broke down in tears when the couple received word that their 9-year-old daughter had been found dead. She probably died from a blow to the head. On September 22, 1969, 8-year-old Susan Nason disappeared in Foster City, California. Local residents decided to help the police by forming search parties to comb the town and its surroundings. There were suggestions that the girl could be lost in the small mountains outside the city, but several days of searching did not yield results. Among the volunteers was Eileen's father, George. Here are his memories of those days.
I just joined the others. It was normal to help in the search. Everyone understood how important it was. We search every corner, every trail. When a child goes missing, everyone wants to find them, even if you don't really know what to do. You just help because it is necessary. What else was left?
The US Air Force even joined the search. Police and civilians continued to search for the girl without success. The next version was the assumption that the girl could have drowned. Captain Clark Kempsky said that a team of divers will conduct an underwater search in the lagoons closest to her home.
We're still working on leads. We've probably got over 100 already, plus 5 officers who do nothing but check on them. We have a description of a possible vehicle. It's not related to that time when the girl was last seen, but related to an incident that happened 3 days earlier.
What kind of incident history is silent? I used a paid newspaper archive to find the details. According to the papers, 3 days earlier, an unidentified man driving a light blue station wagon, circa 1961-63, with cardboard boxes in the back, offered a local girl a lift. The driver was described as a middle-aged man with a heavy face and dark hair with streaks on the edges. Kempsky noted that this is only a fragmentary clue, and at least 10 million Americans fit this description. But he had to start somewhere, so he asked the Federal Bureau of Investigation to join the case. Subsequently, detectives assumed that the disappearance of the girl could be the work of a psychopath. Colleagues of Donald, Susan's father, decided to act. They placed an ad in newspapers offering a $10,000 reward for any information that could lead to finding the girl or bringing her home. In 1969, that was about $70,000 by today's standards. Later, this amount was doubled. Police said that the company Donald Nason worked for has increased the reward to $20,000, but this money will be paid only if the girl is returned safe and sound. The reward for the arrest and conviction of the kidnapper was $10,000. A little more than 3 months later, on December 2nd, Near Crystal Spring Reservoir, an unnamed water department employee noticed a thin mattress lying in a ravine 10 to 15 meters below the road leading to Half Moon Bay. But something was wrong with that mattress, it was covering something. When the man came closer, he saw fragments of a corpse and smelled a sharp, unpleasant smell. He turned to the police. The police lifted the mattress and discovered the body, which belonged to an unknown girl. It was difficult to identify the corpse by external features. The body was so decomposed that the bones and skull began to be exposed. The body was photographed, and these photos were shown to Margaret Nason, the mother of the missing Susan. The woman could not identify her daughter by the face, because it was no longer there, but she recognized the dress. It was a homemade dress that Margaret made herself. This is the dress Susan was wearing on the day she disappeared. The ring worn by the girl also served as confirmation. Although she was badly deformed, Margaret recognized her. Examination of the identification of the body using dental charts and X-rays conclusively established that it was indeed Susan Nason. Due to the poor condition of the soft tissues, the medical examiner could not determine whether Susan had been sexually assaulted, but the cause of death was not in question. A stone was found at the place where the body was found, which served as a murder tool. On the skull, immediately above the right ear, there was a dent, caused by a blow with a blunt object. A deformed ring may indicate that Susan was trying to defend herself from blows. The police tried to establish who and why committed this crime, but there were more questions than answers, and over time, the case turned into a cold case. Now, let's go back to Eileen and her sudden memory of the murder. To understand what happened that day, here is her version of events. When Eileen Franklin was a child, she and her sister Janice were usually driven to school by their father George in his Volkswagen van. That day, Eileen saw her friend Susan on the way to school and asked her dad if they could give her a lift. George agreed, but asked Janice, Eileen's older sister, to give up her seat to Susan and get out of the car. It was an odd detail, however, that George had built something of a bed into his car instead of a back seat. It was a fixed board with a thin mattress on top, turning the car into something of a camper. Susan got into the car and they drove off. After a while, George said, "You know what, girls? We're going to walk around the school today." He turned off the main road in the direction of Half Moon Bay and drove towards a secluded part of the hills. The girls played and climbed onto the improvised bed, continuing to fool around. What happened next? No one expected. Now, let's listen to the recording of the phone conversation.
What happened?
Hi. My wife just told me something. When she was 8 years old, she witnessed a murder. The killer is someone she now knows well.
Killer or victim?
Both the killer and the victim. It happened 20 years ago. The case was never closed.
You know the suspect's name?
Yes, his name is George Franklin. This is her father.
Eileen told the police, and later in court, the following. George sat for a while and watched the girls play on the mattress, then suddenly jumped to them in the back of the car, threw himself on top of Susan and pressed herself against her. Eileen got scared and climbed into the front passenger seat. Looking back, she saw her dad moving over her friend. I don't think I need to explain what exactly he was doing at that moment. According to Eileen, she curled up and just waited for it to be over, not understanding what was happening. She was scared. At some point, she decided to get out of the car, closed the door behind her, and walked 10 meters away. After that, the memories are a failure. The next thing she remembers is her father holding a rock with both hands and swinging it down on Susan's head twice.
I had a memory of my father approaching Susan Nason with a stone in his hands. He raised both hands to the sky ... When George finished, he ran up to his daughter and sternly said,
"If you say a word to anyone about what happened here, I will kill you."
After these words, he forced his daughter to help him pull a thin mattress out of the car to cover the body, which had already been thrown into the ravine.
Also, Eileen said that her friend had a ring on her hand that day that broke because when George threw the stone away after the murder, it fell on her hand with the ring and the stone in it shattered. For some reason, she remembered this detail very well, Detectives compared these testimonies with case materials from 20 years ago and found coincidences: the way the girl was killed and the damaged ring. Although she could learn these details from the newspapers, but we will talk about that later. When the police came to George's house to talk to him, he asked, "Did you talk to my daughter?" It is interesting that his eldest daughter, Janice, sister Eileen, has already testified about him. It was 5 years before Eileen recalled a repressed memory of the day of the murder, which Eileen said she had witnessed. Janice's version is slightly different. She does not remember Susan getting into her father's car on the way to school that day. She didn't say anything about it at all, but she told something else, no less creepy and intriguing. The first detail: if George did drive Susan to school that day, it wasn't the first time. He used to pick up his daughter's friend on the way to school and drop them off. Janice recalls that he often played the game, Touch Me Here, with the girls. The essence of the game consisted in the fact that the presenter quickly named parts of the body, for example, ear, nose, eye, head, leg, or hand, and his opponent had to touch the named part in time. If he made a mistake, he lost, fulfilled some wish, and became the host in the next round. All in all, it's a disgusting situation when a grown man plays this with little girls, especially in the context of this story. Another discrepancy is the mattress. Yes, it did disappear from George's car, but not on the day of the murder, but a few days later. These are just memories, and it's easy to make a mistake. Nevertheless, both daughters claimed that their father molested them as well. Janice confirmed that it started for her when she was in the 3rd or 4th grade, which is the same age Susan was when she disappeared. In addition, Janice said that their father often drove past the crime scene where the girl's body was found. She also remembers that in 1969, during investigative actions, when the police made a round of residents in connection with the murder, their house was also not bypassed. Janice said that while she was being interviewed, George kicked her without the police noticing, warning her not to say anything. For example, about the fact that her father is constantly trying to drive past the scene of the murder. According to Janice, she always suspected that her father was a murderer, but this evidence from 20 years ago was not enough to make George a suspect. However, the evidence based on Eileen's recalled memory turned out to be sufficient. George Franklin was arrested and brought to court. Eileen sat opposite her father and testified against him as a witness to the murder. However, here too, everything is not so clear. A video of Eileen recounting her conversation with her mother was shown in the courtroom. When asked if she mentioned being hypnotized, Eileen admitted that during the 2nd or 3rd conversation with her mother, she said she had not been hypnotized and that she had been dishonest with her. We will talk about hypnosis a little later. And I have something to say. George's house was searched and the cops found something. Whole stacks of magazines and books with so-called CPU content were found. There were also materials about incest and even zoophilia, in addition to other sex toys that the police described as children's. Knowing this, it is worth noting that there were 5 children in the Franklin family. 1 boy, other girls. Ellen was Dad's favorite. They often walked alone together, and we can imagine what they could do alone. Sisters Ellen and Janice both testified in court that Dad sexually harassed them and was generally a horrible person and had serious problems with alcohol and anger management. However, he was a monster only for his family and for everyone else. He wore the mask of a grounded nice man, a common practice among abusers. More interestingly, during the trial, it became known that the girl's mother, according to them, also suspected that George had something to do with Susan's murder, which was probably the reason for their divorce in 1974. However, she never reported her suspicions to the police due to her intense fear of George. Nevertheless, the jury decided that Ellen's story was enough to convict George of Susan's murder, and in November 1990, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Eileen releases the book Sins of My Father. The book became a success, and even caused a wave of unblocked memories of violence and people. However, take your time, this is not the end of the story, because after only 6 years, George Franklin will be released again in 1996. The judge overturned the conviction and set George Franklin free based on several miscarriages of justice. such as the details Alina gave about the crimes were based on newspaper articles about the murder and not on recovered memory. Although the prosecutor insisted Alina could not have known the details about the mattress, a stone and a ring, but as it turned out, she could, since these details were repeatedly covered in newspapers. And from her memories, they picked up Susan on the highway to school. Only then, after picking up the old archives, it turned out that the girl disappeared after returning home from school, where she returned around 3:00 p.m., said hello to her mother, and then went to her friend's house to return the borrowed baby carrier shoes, and a friend was the last person to see Susan before she disappeared. Well, in short, Eileen began to change her testimony with each new established fact, and this agreement does not sound too reliable to let a person play for the rest of his life. While the case was waiting for a retrial, Ellen's sister and Janice quarreled, and Janice reported already in court that Eileen Franklin's repressed memory was caused by hypnosis. As we remember, at the previous trial, Ellen said that she was not hypnotized and swore under oath. Repressed memories are memories of traumatic or emotionally painful events that have been blocked by the subconscious mind as a defense mechanism. There are several triggers that can awaken such a memory. For example, sounds, smells, images, places, or situations that remind of a traumatic event. In our case, Ellen unlocked her memory while playing with her daughter, who resembled her childhood friend Susan. But there are two more ways to unblock a memory consciously. The first is psychotherapy. When working with traumatic experiences, a person gradually discovers and rethinks painful aspects of his past. Often people remember a traumatic experience. The second method is hypnosis. But there is a problem with hypnosis. It can not only unlock real repressed memories, but also create false ones inspired by the process itself or the therapist's questions. This happens due to the increased susceptibility to suggestion of a person during hypnosis. In a state of deep concentration, a person can take conjured images as his own memories, even if they are not real. The reason for the sisters' quarrel could be money. Since the story is interesting, the book is selling well, a film adaptation is possible, and everyone wanted their piece of the pie. For example, Ellen's brother admitted during the interview that he also knew about hypnosis, but Ellen called him and begged him not to tell about it in court. The situation for the prosecution is unpleasant. Veronica was stabbed to death on a local golf course on January 8, 1976, and Paula was similarly murdered a month later outside a local church. Both victims were sexually assaulted, but Ellen miscalculated because the cops had a DNA sample of the killer of these two girls. The DNA was compared with her father's DNA. No match was found. Later, their killer was caught, and he turned out to be Rodney Halbauer. In short, accusations fell like a house of cards. It is sad in this story that the killer of little Susan was never identified, so his further fate is unknown. Maybe he was even a serial killer. We can only assume. Presumably, George was the murderer, but there was no direct evidence against him, and to this day, there is none. In my personal opinion, if you take all the known facts and the testimony of the Franklin sisters, the abuse and sexual harassment against them could very well have been real. If he did this to his own children, he could easily hurt Susan. I think Ellen just wanted justice and was trying to punish her father for all the horrible things he allegedly did to them. She directed all the money from book sales to charity, which speaks not of mercantile interests to monetize the story for her own sake, but of the desire for justice for the executioner. If her story is true, the beast escaped punishment. If not, then an innocent person has avoided life imprisonment. George died in 2016. Eileen Franklin has moved to a new state, where she lives under a different name. She now wishes to remain anonymous. Write in the comments what you think about this story. Was George Franklin really the monster Ellen tried to show the world? Or was he really innocent and just defending himself in court? That's the story, baby. Thanks for viewing. Take care of yourself.